Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, November 16th, 2023. Tonight's format, for those of you that might be new to the broadcast, is a live question and answer. So, any of our alumni, families, or participants are allowed to attend and they submit their questions throughout and during. You can also always, even if you're not an alumni of our program, you could submit questions, suggestions, ideas, feedback to webinar@evoketherapy.com. The questions that come in through that portal will be placed at the top of the queue. The live questions will come next. And if you're a family member, a friend, somebody adjacent to the Evoke family, you can tell me your relationship with the client if it applies, and that'll help give me some context and your age if you're not an adult, because sometimes siblings will attend these broadcasts and ask questions, and siblings, of course, can be virtually any age. So with that, before I get to the pre-submitted questions, I just want to make the announcement. I think that is particularly relevant during this time of the holidays when there's increased stress, when there's the complexity of feelings that come into our lives around the holidays. I can't think of any better time, better investment to make in yourself than attending a therapeutic intensive. Now, I know that sounds like I'm just selling something, but I don't sell things that I don't believe and live in my heart, in my soul, and my bones. I participated in my own such workshop, approximately 9 of them over the years. My wife, my family, my children, my partners, therapists, key employees have attended these. This is something I believe in. It is a wonderful therapy springboard or therapy accelerator. If you aren't new to therapy, it can help move your therapy along. If you have a child that's struggling, if you have a spouse that's struggling, if you're struggling in a marriage, the fundamental issue is the relationship that you have with yourself, with your past, with your history. The research is clear on this fact. So, our version of this is the Finding You workshop. December 6th through 10th is our next offering. Of course, January 17th through 21st after that. We also have an online offering. January 26th through to 28th is that offering. We started the online version of it during the pandemic. We found it to be so successful, surprisingly successful, that we've continued it since the pandemic, since the lockdown has ended across the world. To be clear, the online version is half the time. It's over a weekend. It's about a third of the cost, and you don't have to travel. So if resources are at a premium, like they are for many of us, then the online option is a wonderful option. So Finding You or Finding You Online. We also have a Returning to You, the sequel to Finding You. I'll be hosting the next version of that, the next iteration of that, March 6th through 10th. And then we have something that we do once in a while called the Finding Connection Workshop. This is for 4 couples, a multi-couple workshop where you're doing your own work. But the gift of this one is you get to see and understand your spouse's work. I believe, and I found in my own marriage therapy as a participant, that part of maintaining a loving, lifelong relationship is learning to fall in love with your partner's dilemma over and over again. That means understanding where they come from, understanding what they bring to the table, both their resources and their strengths, but also the wounds that can sometimes show up as symptoms and triggers for our problematic relationships or our problems in our relationships. We also have custom finding connection workshops for co-parents and couples, and finding family for families. So if you're interested in any of that, contact intensives at evoketherapy.com and they can help set you up with that. All right, let me get to the pre-submitted questions to begin. First question reads thus. Part 1, this is a multi-parter. Part 1, we have a 16-year-old child with ADHD, anxiety, and depression, which have driven eating disorders, SHSI, a bunch of disorders, and substance abuse issues in the past. She graduated both a long-term residential eating disorder program and more recently wilderness therapy. She has also worked with an outpatient therapist. This is all to emphasize that when she says she does not like or trust her current therapist at her supportive boarding school, we don't have any reason to doubt her assessment. She has lots of treatment experience, has bonded with past therapists, and has the ability to state what works for her. As parents, we have also been turned off by the therapist's manner and approach. Part 2, we want to model an appropriate response to this situation for our daughter, who is currently stable and not using self-destructive behaviors and or past negative coping skills. My question is this: what is the right response to this treatment refusal? We are on a careful, unrushed plan to transition her home with appropriate support. In the meantime, what and how do we communicate with the therapist and our daughter about their interactions going forward while she remains at the school where there is not another therapist option. I absolutely love everything that you have said here. I want to praise you because as a parent, I hear you learning to attune to your daughter, learning to, especially because she's demonstrating some healthier behaviors. But even if that weren't the case, to kind of trust her intuition, trust her own experience with it. And I'm not surprised because I think the vast majority of therapists um, aren't somebody that I would recommend to you or to your children. I think we need to be critical consumers of therapists. I think it's important to understand that it's our job to ask the therapist difficult questions and expect intelligent answers. If we have This is my fundamental belief about therapy. This is the golden moment in therapy. This is the an explanation of the method that differentiates what we do at Evoke and our intensive work with what other people are providing. We know and are clear with the new voices that are out there that trauma is the source. Trauma is the source of mental illness and its symptoms. We know this. This is not a new idea, actually. This idea was the underlying idea behind the invention of psychotherapy and Freud's ideas in the first place, right? We actually knew this from the beginning, but it's been lost for so long. And so voices like Gabor Mate and Bessel van der Kolk and Dr. Daniel Levine, Peter Levine, excuse me, and Daniel Siegel, we know that they are getting the voice out, thankfully, that trauma is the core issue, the source, the cause, and to not be distracted by the symptoms. We know that. But what we don't hear a lot about is the method. How does it heal? You don't go to a doctor with a broken knee and they just simply show you a chart of the structure of a knee and how it was broken and the force that was applied to it and why it's broken, right? They might do that for some background, but they apply a therapeutic modality. They reset it. They stabilize it. There might be surgery involved. They do something to it besides just explain it. So I think what you're aware of is that there's a pretty high bar. We have a pretty high bar for what we expect and demand of therapists in the world at Evoke. We do, and you hear that on my broadcasts all the time. I'm sure. What I would say, that the simple answer I would say is, after saying all of this, is maybe I think it's better for her not to see anybody than to see a therapist that she doesn't resonate with, that she doesn't trust, that she doesn't experience as capable of holding her. So I guess the short answer would be that to allow her to terminate therapy and rejoin. I mean, I would hope that the supportive, quote unquote, boarding school would offer an opportunity for somebody outside of their system. That's my hope. I think it's okay if you want to venture so far as to give feedback to the program and to the therapist. You're welcome to do that. I think there's some risks with that. There's some risks of alienating the management and if it's an inadequate therapist, which it sounds like it very well may be. I don't necessarily trust them with the feedback. I always say, when I'm coaching people about what to look for in a therapist, that as an adult, I think the responsibility lies at the client's feet. First and foremost, to tell the therapist what they don't like or what doesn't work for them. But an adult is much more on an equal level in terms of power than what you're describing the situation that your daughter is in. She doesn't have equal power. She is subject to the authority of the school and their staff and their administration. So I wouldn't require her to do much with it. I would just allow her to have permission to quit if there's an opportunity to find somebody external to the system that you could bring in or that she could meet with, even virtually. Somebody that she could meet with virtually. If those options exist, in my mind, they ought to exist in a system that understands trauma and mental health and well-being, even if it's not a therapeutic school. But I suppose the last idea is just allow her to terminate for now and then restart therapy when she gets home. But requiring her to go or expecting her to go or asking her to keep going because she needs therapy, but the therapist is not a good fit for her, I think will do more harm than good. I think it will be a therapy intervention to empower her to withdraw from therapy, even if those other options aren't available. My daughter, having been exposed to a lot of therapeutic concepts, my youngest, having been exposed to a lot of therapists and a lot of therapeutic concepts, has also made similar decisions. She has decided to terminate several therapists over the year. Has asked for the opportunity and the support to go to therapy, but in many cases finds it to be very unpleasant. And when she has terminated, I've allowed her to save face. I've allowed her to withdraw. At one point, with my third child, third of four, I actually went to the program, to the outpatient program, and gave feedback to the therapist and to their supervisor about why I was supporting, encouraging, empowering my child to withdraw from therapy. I was kind but clear about what I know, what I come to the table with. I wasn't going to deny that I'm a therapist who's been in practice for many years and understands some of the core tenets of good therapy. I wasn't going to be put back into my place. And I remember when I it took a few weeks to kind of develop that conceptualization, that idea, even the courage to allow and to pull my child and to give feedback to the therapeutic staff at the outpatient program. And I remember thinking, gosh, if it took me a while to figure this out, to summon the idea and the courage to do this, imagine what non-therapist parents must feel like. Imagine how much more difficult it must be for people who don't have the background and the training and the experience that I have. So I support you and her to the nth degree. And there'd be a lot that would say, well, the child has to tell the therapist why they're terminating. And my response is, no, no, they don't. They don't owe the therapist anything. In fact, if people believe that they owe the therapist that they misunderstand the basic idea of psychotherapy, which is the client, after the exchange of money for the time that the therapist offers, the client doesn't owe the therapist anything emotionally or intellectually. It's a one-way street. The role of therapists in therapy is, yes, you pay for my time, but after that, you owe me nothing. You get to show up as you. If I find the experience as a therapist to be unsafe or intolerable, or I don't think I can be helpful, I'm allowed to also terminate therapy. But you don't owe me an explanation. You don't have to justify your reasons. And lastly, I'll just say this. If the therapist were a good therapist, you wouldn't even be asking this question, because the therapist would be sensitive enough to recognize and to make room for the fact that he or she might be upsetting or not hearing or not seeing the client. I'm sure that there have been signs and signals and opportunities for this therapist to see that, and they haven't. And I really I love your question. I love what you're attuned to. And those are kind of my ideas about it. Allow her to withdraw. If she can find another avenue to get her healing, that's wonderful. And if she can't, you can decide if you want to go farther and give feedback while she's there, or maybe even after she leaves. But a good therapist, I want to be as clear as I can. A good therapist knows something. They know that the moment that a client expresses some discontent toward them, their process, how they've showed up, what they've said, what they've done, that's the golden moment in psychotherapy, to show up as an adult differently than the way most likely that the parents and the other big people has showed up in the client's life. You don't defend yourself. You don't make excuses. You don't tell the client how it's their resistance. You don't explain to them how it's their fault or their issue. You thank the client, genuinely thank the client for their expressing, taking the risk to tell you. You acknowledge the risk that it must be to stand up to an authority figure like that. And therapists in some ways are the ultimate authority figure, because you're vulnerable and they are the experts in this moment. And this different kind of response, right, without ego, creates a healing experience for the therapist. I've had to tell my therapist, who I think is the best therapist I've ever met or come across in my entire life, by a pretty significant margin. I've had to tell her on several occasions over the 24 years that I've been seeing her, when I was upset at something that she said or did. And going back to that first time that I tried to do that, because I was so angry at something that she did when I brought my mother in for therapy and it didn't go well. When I told her what I felt, I was refreshingly shocked at her response. She said, "Thank you for telling me. It must have been very difficult for you to do that, and I'm honored that you would tell me. I'm so glad to know how I affected you, and I'm sorry that I did that, and I'll try to do better." And I remember this was probably like 2002. In fact, I'm pretty confident it was 2002 because I remember my 22-year-old was a baby at the time. I remember thinking, I've never been in a place like this before where an adult could respond so effortlessly and so gracefully. And I thought to myself, I have found an amazing therapist. And over the years, when there were missteps or mistakes, sometimes she'll come to the session having had the thought or the idea that she made a mistake in the previous week. She's modeling for me that it's okay for me to have my thoughts and my feelings. And those don't have to fit within the box of her being a good therapist and getting it right. So, yes, completely supportive and empowering of you and of your daughter. And I'm glad for her that you're doing your work and can recognize this. Thanks for asking. Next question reads another two-parter. Part one, my 20-year-old son attended Evoke and then therapeutic boarding school 3 years ago. His main issue is smoking pot. We do not support him financially. Last year, he worked to support himself. This year, he attends a community college and gets financial aid. A typical scenario is he gets financial aid for the semester, spends all of his money on smoking pot, sports, gambling, and then runs out of money and doesn't have any money for food or rent. This is again what happened this week. He called after not responding to any of our texts or calls for weeks and says he has no money for rent or food because he spent it all on sports gambling. He's not asking for money because he knows we will not financially support him, but I'm having a hard time figuring out what to even say to him on the phone. I don't want to lecture and sound negative, but on the other hand, I have nothing else to say. I would appreciate your guidance on how to think about this and what to say to him because he's calling asking for advice. I tell him to go to Narcotics Anonymous, Gambling Anonymous, or whatever he thinks is he needs to get help. And but other with but what excuse me, he thinks he needs to get help with. But other than that, I'm having a hard time having a phone conversation with him, even though he's calling asking for advice and help. Any guidance you can provide on how to think about this would be really appreciated. Oh my goodness, such complex, difficult, wonderful questions tonight. I mean, for the most part, I think that there's nothing to do. I think you listen. I think you empathize. I think the suggestion about going to Gambling Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous might be helpful. I think what he needs is empathy. He needs compassion. He needs non-judgment. Ironically, he needs not necessarily a solution or advice. He just needs your presence. And if that's unsatisfying to him, it's because he thinks that you're supposed to solve the problem. He thinks the problem is outside of him and someone knows it. I, I don't know the words you would say, but the energy would be something like, I'm so sorry. That's so difficult. I think you'll figure it out. You're figuring it out. If you can tell a story where you relate to him, I'm sure that you've made repetitive mistakes in your life when the answer was crystal clear and in front of you. If you can share stories like that's fantastic. Um, but in terms of specific problem solving, I'm not sure that there's some nugget that you need to give to him. And if it feels too taxing on your nervous system to listen to this, you can make up an excuse and shorten the time of the phone call or be available only when you're rested and ready and capable of listening. There's not much for you to do. Listen, non-judgment, compassion, relating, empathy, and boundaries, right? That's the last thing that he needs. He needs you to be boundaried. He needs you to be a self, a person. And I think that other than that, there's nothing to do except for hold him this. You want to be a safe person so that if he gets into a life-threatening situation, he would call you, of course. But I think this is part of his process. This is part of what he needs to figure out. Now, if he comes to you saying, I need treatment, I need to go inpatient, I need to go to a hospital, I need therapy or psychiatry, in my world, that's something where Financial support makes all the sense because those are all tools for the cure, if you will, for treating the underlying issue, the trauma, the unhealed wound that he's acting out in these ways. So I don't think the advice is the most important part. I'm sure that the advice is not the most important part. I think the answer is right in front of him. He's had enough treatment. He can figure this out himself. And your suggestions, while they're not bad or negative, or I don't think they're necessarily going to do much harm, but it's not your job to fix. It's not your problem to fix. It's not yours. It's his. And as a parent of children, I know in my body how difficult it is to watch my children suffer when they express it to me in any fashion. It can be overwhelming, extraordinarily taxing on my nervous system. So, in the meantime, make sure you're taking care of yourself, and where you feel like you want to take this on more, find a place to let it go. A support group for you, an Al-Anon group for you, a Codependence Anonymous. Same advice that you gave to him. Go to meetings, go to support groups, go to a therapist where you can vent and unload your burden that somebody else can hold. And that's not just psychobabble. That's an analogy, a metaphor for what the purposes of therapy and support groups are sometimes. Sometimes we have unsolvable problems. They have support groups for the spouses of people with dementia and Alzheimer's. They don't go there to learn how to fix it. They go there for support. Some people go to Al-Anon and Codependence Anonymous after their identified patient has passed on. They're not going there to try to fix something. They're going there to take responsibility for their own serenity, their own healing. So attend to yourself, be boundaried. Advice is not really probably the important thing that he's missing. All the information's out there, and the advice you've given is fine. And then empathize and relate if you can. Make him feel less shame. He's probably in a shame cycle right now where he's feeling horrible about it. The problems that he's created have come to roost, if you will. And that's probably an intensely shameful and lonely place. And so providing him with compassion, empathy, connection while he's going through that can be helpful. It's difficult. It can be torture for the parent. But those are the things that you can contribute to his problem, to his issue. All right. Next question. Now, this is a three-parter. Somebody writes, my 19-year-old son went to Wilderness, then a therapeutic boarding school, and then a public high school senior year. He did not want to go to college or trade school. He's been oppositional and volatile and is living outside of our home. We are trying to be there for him emotionally, but whenever I reach out to help him, he starts blaming us for why he can't live at home, and how we should be paying for him to go to pursue his dream for 4 years, as if we were going to school like his brother did. We have been paying for a place for 3 months, and now he has a full-time job. We will support him for 6 months. We have told him our boundaries, but he has been relentless. He won't get counseling, but he often says or texts how he is, quote unquote, done, and how he has been living a terrible life, and that he is plagued with knowing how he will live and where he will live. He sometimes sounds like he is suicidal, but never diagnosed with suicidal ideation or depression. Is there some way to know when he is serious or when he is just trying to manipulate us? Statistically, he has been manipulating us. When he was younger, we got a professional involved when he made a small cut on his arm in front of us, but it was decidedly manipulative. I use my best judgment to try to help him, but many times reaching out can be worse. I think if I don't, it could be the last thing I hear, and I would have said at least that I loved him. I am working on myself. I reached out to him after he was upset with my husband, and my husband is now upset with me because it made things worse. It is difficult to know when to do something, and I say very little when I do. Our son just vomits out all of his emotions and blames whoever talks to him. Once someone is an adult and won't seek help since they don't believe that there's a need, or maybe it won't matter, is there a way to know something bad is going to occur, or with just words and no outward actions of harm? Difficult question. Very, very similar to the previous one. I don't think there's anything else you can do. I have some trepidation about answering this question because once suicide is on the line, it changes the equation for me. I can't tell you what to do because if he's playing around, that I don't mean that word that way. If he's considering the idea, chewing over the idea of suicidality as an option, I don't want to give you advice because you're going to have to live with the outcome. At the end of the day, what I do know is you can't win. You can only choose how to lose. There's no guarantee that you can figure out the right thing to say and to do and to know where he's at in his severity. That equation is a haunting one. It's an absolutely torturous life to live. So if I tell you to set a boundary, if I tell you what to say, what not to say, and it gets worse, no harm done. But if it gets worse to the point where he's actively and attempts suicide, you don't want to defer that decision to me. You don't want to defer that decision to anybody. I think what you have to come to terms with is the limitations of what it means to be a person in his life. That you can't control, you can't save him. And that's true. So with that, I would say do anything you think will help. And if you think it won't help, don't do it. But there's no guarantee. There's no silver bullet. There's no course that any psychotherapist in the world can tell you to follow. And that if you do so, can guarantee the outcome that you want, that he'll stay alive and get better. He sounds like he has some borderline personality traits. And the psychological dynamic, my therapist calls it the game that they play. But the psychological dynamic or game that they play is simple. You lose, end of game. That's the game. He wants to make everybody else, you, somebody outside of him, circumstances, situations, what's happened in his past. He wants to make that the problem. That's the core dynamic for the borderline. And by the way, children are borderline in a lot of ways. Borderline is a developmental stage that most of us pass through, but many of us don't. A lot of people in the world go around fantasizing that the devil is out there. And as Carl Jung said, all the devils that we need to fight and we need to focus on are running around inside of our own heads. We are the cause of our problems. Yes, stuff happened to us. I say this to young people all the time. You are not in control. You are not responsible for what happened to you. And if your parents made mistakes, and I know that they did, because you have human parents, and therefore they made lots of mistakes, like human parents do, like humans do. That's not your fault. But now it's your responsibility to deal with it. So again, the psychological task is to realize what's your responsibility and what's not, what you have control over and what you don't. When people struggling with addiction go to 12-step meetings, most 12-step meetings end with the serenity prayer that goes like this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So why in virtually every 12-step meeting, everywhere in the world, every day, many hundreds and thousands of times a day, are people suffering from addiction and codependency? Why are they reciting that prayer at the end of their meeting? Because that's the foundational issue in addiction or codependency, is not understanding the nature of relationships and who's responsible for what and whose feelings are whose. So I can't tell you what to do. What I can tell you to do is keep working on your codependency. Every time you're inclined to tell him to go to a meeting, and it sounds like you've said it a couple times, go to a meeting yourself. As I've stated many, many times, the story I've told when I was teaching a lecture on codependency, and one of the psychologists raised her hand and said, how can you suggest to us that we suggest to a parent, a mother, to kick her child out of the home when he's addicted to something, when the possible consequences of that are death? And my response is, I would never tell a mother what to do, or father for that matter. I would try to help them heal their codependency, and they would decide what to do. And part of deciding what to do is coming to terms and to peace with the limitations of your power. I love what my friend in recovery said to me one day when he said, the difference between me and God, me and my higher power, he said, is that I never think, excuse me, the difference between me and God is that God never thinks he's me. This is something, you're not in charge of fixing his addiction, his turmoil, his suffering. You're in charge of fixing yours, addressing yours, and healing yours. And then from that more healed place or that place in recovery, whatever you do will be fine. So, again, very similar to the previous question, different in its severity because of the threat of suicide, but the conclusions are the same. The conclusions are, as James Hollis once said, is that so many of problems that get presented in psychotherapy are because people have accepted the wrong answers to life's important questions. And as I said the other night on the podcast, as I ended with this, it's really important as parents to understand that our children are not ours. They are theirs. Our children, especially our adult children, they're their own. Their lives, they're our higher powers, they're their universes. But that pain, that over-identification with their suffering hurts all of us. Hurts all of us. You can't become so numb to it or dissociated from it that you don't feel when the people you care about hurt and suffer. But you can learn to fundamentally extricate yourself from the drama, from the trauma, from the pain, from the torture of the daily roller coaster life, and from the abuse that he seems to be inflicting upon you. I don't see much benefit of subjecting yourself to his abusive behavior. I don't think that's helping you and him. But again, you could set a boundary with that. I could simply encourage you to not allow him to abuse you. As a result of that, he could get desperate. He could take his own life. He could write you a letter that blames you. He could talk about that he felt so alone, and you would be racked for the rest of your life with guilt. So you have to come, whatever you do, you have to come to terms with the reality of what is. That's the work. The work of enlightenment, of healing, of recovery, of mental health is really just coming to terms with what's real in the world. Unlearning the constructs, the programming, the ideas that we were given from the culture. The culture doesn't know. Our parents had very little information on mental health and mental illness. Our parents did very little work themselves in their own healing. So the fact of the matter is, most of therapy is unlearning what we believe to be true automatically without questioning it. And in this case, the idea is that he's not yours and you can't fix him. You can only work on you and fix you. And then from that place of wholeness or more wholeness, closer to wholeness, whatever you do will be okay. And you'll do it from a place of love and not fear. You'll do it from a place of courage and not anger or resentment or control or manipulation. And you'll do it from a place where you recognize that the outcome is beyond your control. But I can't give you a formula that guarantees control. And if I did or somebody does, I would find somebody else to talk to. You can temporarily have him hospitalized if he's threatened, but that's 48 hours. And if that'll make a difference, do that. But you'll likely be faced with the same challenge after the temporary hospitalization. And then he'll know what not to tell you to not get himself into that jam again. So I am very, very sorry for the dilemma that you're dealing with, but it's not uncommon. All right. Next question. Somebody writes, my son was at Evoke during the summer of 2021 when he was 13. Since then, he has been at the same residential treatment center and makes slow, inconsistent progress through the program. And the last couple of months, he has finally begun addressing the trauma he experienced in the year or so before we sent him to Evoke. In the last in the last week, we had another relapse, and he has enacted all the behaviors that prompted us to get him into treatment: running away, substance use, fighting. He has a handful of good relationships with adults at his residential treatment center, including his therapist, but he's been struggling with his length of stay, 2 years, and advocates for a change. The boys at his program with whom he developed close relationships have graduated and moved on. We all agree that he is not ready to come home. I'm also tired of the status quo and struggle with my frustration over his progress and his setbacks. His therapist suggested we look at a couple of short stay substance use programs in an effort to help him gain better management of his urges that are triggered by the trauma work. My instinct is that changing his therapeutic environment while he's working on trauma is not a good idea. However, I believe the program is concerned about whether they can keep him safe. As we sort through options and approaches, what else should we consider? How do the trauma and substance use challenges and treatments interact? Again, just like the last question, when a question gets presented to me where it doesn't just feel like life or death is on the line, but actual life or death is on the line, I have to be very, very careful about what I say. My first thought is sometimes I've seen it work where parents bring them home. If you don't think you can keep them safe at home or safe there, then some escalated level of care. He's still young enough that you can require this without his okay. Do that if that makes you feel safer about his safety. Changing while he's working on his trauma. When my son was I sent my son to our program before it was called Evoke. I had my son in our program 15 years ago. Somewhere around 15 years after I'd started working as a wilderness therapist and running our program. And at some point after his therapeutic stay in wilderness and his school experience, I was ready. I was ready to bring him home. And the therapists and the consultant that I'd hired were telling me he wasn't ready. And I said, I believe you. And he's at the time 13. So I don't think he's going to be ready for a long time. I think we're still in for it. But I'm ready. And it doesn't sound like you're ready. I brought him home. We had challenges. We had ups and downs. We had relapse and regression. And then some period of time later, he got sober and clean and focused on school, went to college, got a graduate degree, and has been sober for 15 years, 14 years. So I think the mistake that people make when thinking about treatment is that the child comes home fully baked. Again, I can't tell you to bring him home, because if you do and the worst thing happens, you'll never forgive me or yourself for trusting somebody else with the most important thing in your life by a very long shot. But I would start to think outside of the box. I would start to think counterintuitively. And I would get myself ready for what I think is going to be a messy journey ahead, no matter where he is and where he goes. At some point, we give our children, even our adolescent children, enough information, enough treatment, right? We give them enough support and resources, but at some point, they have to go out and live it and fail it and struggle with it. I hope you have a therapist. I hope you have a therapist who's an expert in parenting. If you don't, contact Coaching and Evoke Therapy programs, or contact me, and I'd be happy to make a recommendation. So you need support. You need Al-Anon. You need a sponsor. You need resources. You need to be grounded on a daily basis. You need to be recentered. You need to deal with it, what is going to be inevitably a very difficult, complicated, back and forth, up and down experience and process with your child. And you need to be guided through a process of discovering what's true for you, what's right for you, and subsequently then what's right with regard to your child. So it's not an easy, all of these questions tonight are not easy questions, but I hope you hear the sensibility. I hope you hear that this work is about shifting the project from changing the child to changing yourself. Understanding that the child is not the problem. The child is their problem, but the child is not your problem. You are your problem. And the good news is that means that you can fix it because you're the problem. Your serenity, your lack of peace of mind is a problem. Grief and pain and sadness are inevitable. They are inescapable. I love what Heinz Kohut said when he said that the goal of the psychotherapist is to turn the client into a normal, suffering human being. I love that idea. To give the client the support to go through life that includes all kinds of tragedies and difficulties and unsolvable problems. So there's no guarantee. There's no way to control it. Remember, watch the movies and the myths that teach this. Star Wars is my favorite. The energy of the dark side is fear. Starts with fear. It turns into anger, into hate, and ultimately leads to trying to control everything and everybody, to not hurt again. The two primary energies in the psyche, in the universe, are fear and love. Right? Love means that we're going to feel pain. Love means that we're going to suffer and struggle the human experience, the ups and downs. And fear, if we don't challenge it, if we don't deconstruct it, if we don't learn to deal with it, can easily turn into trying to control outcomes, to trying to control other people. That's why the Serenity Prayer is uttered virtually at every 12-step meeting, every day, thousands and thousands and thousands of times a day. Because there's a relationship between our ideas about what it means to be a person and love another person, and our addictions and our codependency and our mental illness, our mental health. There's a direct connection. So tough question, tough scenarios. But those are my thoughts. Somebody writes, I feel drained and empty from my most recent relationship with a woman I've had a 1-year-old with. I'm trying to separate because the relationship is unhealthy and damaging to me. And not just our immediate family members, but my parents and siblings also. I try to stay away, but anytime I am near the mother of my child, I cave and fall back into trying to make the relationship work. I'm aware I have extensive codependency with her and am struggling. I never hardly get to see my son without having to see her also. I feel absent in my baby's life, trying to find multiple slices to the pie that will help me regarding form my independence and hold strong to my boundaries. Any books or information on tools to use to stay strong when feeling weak? I mean, my books, anything written by J.D. Gill, my books that I wrote, my 2 books that I wrote, anything written by James Hollis. I love The Dance of Anger. That's a, a book that teaches that our difficulty with boundaries is because of guilt and fear. And that to become more boundaried, remember this, healing and progressing in a mental health sense will feel horrible. It will feel terrifying. It will induce guilt. That's really important to remember. It won't feel good, at least not at first. Why would it? It's foreign, it's alien, it's different. What's comfortable, what feels like home is our pathology, right? Is our mental illness struggles, our mental health struggles. So what do you do then? How do you develop strength? You've got to be in relationship with other people who can buoy you up. A therapist, a support group like Codependence Anonymous or Adult Children of Alcoholics or Families Anonymous or Al-Anon. You've got to go to places where people who are farther along on the journey than you are, the same journey that you're on. You said in your question that you're codependent with your girlfriend. You're not codependent with her. You're codependent, period. Some people trigger it more than others, but the codependency lives in you. It's evidence. This relationship problem you have with her, and I'm with you. I have it too. This relationship problem that you have with her is not about her. It's about you and your programming in your background, your unhealed trauma and wounding. So you need treatment for those things. That will then give you the grounding, the support, the resources, the courage. You talked about somebody that can support you to do the difficult things, to stand against what you're calling weak. Therapy, I'm writing about this for tomorrow for posting. Therapy is a method where we repair the fractured attachment. And what I mean by that is the result of psychotherapy is I have a sense that I'm okay, that I'll be okay, no matter what happens. That's what a secure attachment feels like. It's not more tools and skills to figure out how to manipulate and control the world and the people in it so that things go my way. Although that happens, that's the crazy thing about attachment is the more healed you become, it feels like magic. In movies, in music, it's excuse me, in art, it's often represented by a superpower. That's what the superpowers of our heroes are about. Because that's how it feels. In the movie Star Wars, which I'm a fan of and mentioned, it looks like the things that the Jedis can do. The the idea of moving objects isn't real, of course, at least not yet. We can't do that. But that's how powerful the transformation feels. That's what the myth, that's what George Lucas was trying to teach us. But he used a metaphor so as to bypass our resistance. And George Lucas was intentional about this. This wasn't an accident on his part. Sometimes artists stumble upon it by accident. But like in Everything Everywhere All at Once or in the Barbie movie, the ones I've been talking about over the past couple of months, watch those. You'll see it there too. The watch The Matrix when he downloads the information because each new lesson, each new healing feels like a superpower. It feels like you can fight your enemies without even hurting them. It's so powerful. It's so profound. So I got a little off on that because I love mythology. I love stories. I love parables. I love how the mystics have taught us over the centuries. They're trying to teach us about a different way of being. And our issue is that the way we were taught how to be and what life is about wasn't true. So we have to unlearn that, which is terrifying and makes us feel lost and makes us feel like there are no guardrails, no rules anymore. And life is going to be chaos and the world is going to be chaos. And that's what it feels like at first. But on the other side of it, there's peace, there's serenity, and there's great, great power. And yes, you might not be able to bend a spoon with your mind when you do your work, but that's the closest way to describe how it feels when you're living an embodied recovery program from codependency and from attachment trauma. When you're living a recovered, when you're living your recovery, it feels that profoundly magical. So the situation that you've created with your child's mother was self-selected by your unconscious mind. You know, Groundhog's Day. Let's use that story. The movie with Bill Murray. Most people have seen it. If you haven't, I've seen it. I love that movie. It's about having the same day over and over again. Obviously, that's a silly idea. That doesn't happen. Time is linear. At least how we experience it is. It is. The metaphor of doing the same day over and over again is that that's really what our lives are about anyway. Yes, the circumstances are changes and we're aging and we're getting older and things are, but it's the same issue. So this issue that has come into your life is here for you to learn what you need to learn, what you haven't figured out yet, what your context, your background, your childhood didn't teach you. Sounds like you have a good relationship with your family and friends, your extended relationship. That's wonderful. And that doesn't preclude the idea that it's valuable to look back and to understand that some of the things that they taught you and modeled weren't right. They just weren't. And if you live according to that paradigm, you'll never get out of it. But you have to get out of it. You have to be in places where people that are experiencing and living this transformation, this recovery that I'm talking about, they're living differently. So much of when I talk about something, I have this post that I'm going to share about. I shared it today on my social media about Thanksgiving. It's absolutely contrary to what most everybody would tell you about Thanksgiving, the holidays, and family. And I had to learn it the hard way. It almost killed me. I've said that before. The wisdom that comes from my 2 books, and I'm working on my 3rd and 4th, the wisdom that came from it nearly killed me, nearly cost me my life. And I had 2 ideas. One was to jettison the old ideas and embark on this new course of figuring out who I was and what was really going on in my life and in the world, or stick with it and suffer and die. And I chose the former. I chose to leave what was comfortable and familiar, to embark on the road less traveled, to do things that, that old saying that when people can't hear the music playing, that it looks like the person dancing to the music is crazy. I kind of butchered that, but that one, that's what it's like. If you're doing well, most people are going to think that you're crazy. If you're living a recovered, more enlightened life, most people, including the people that love you, are going to tell you you're doing it wrong, unless they've done their work. My therapist told me many years ago that once you've been in analysis, right, a very intense form of therapy, once you've been in analysis, you kind of don't want to hang out with anybody else who hasn't been in analysis. And I have found that to be so profoundly true. Some of you have found that to be true. Once you've started on your healing journey, or you've gotten into recovery, or you're regularly attending Al-Anon and working your program, or in recovery for an addiction, or participating in a regular systemic plan of a systemized recovery program, whatever it looks like, whatever healing journey is. It's hard to talk to people who aren't on that journey because you sound like a crazy person. And they look at you like you are. Not going home for Thanksgiving could be the best thing in the world. I had a mother recently tell me that her son decided not to come home for Thanksgiving. And she said to me, I couldn't be more proud of him. This is the first Thanksgiving that he doesn't want to come to. And she said, I could not be more proud of his courage. Do you see how counterintuitive that sounds? That's how this work sounds. All right, folks. I'm going to wrap up. Any leftover questions I'll leave for next time. So like I said, my 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. We have support groups for current alumni families. One starts in about 6 minutes. So if you need to jump off and go to that, tonight at 7 p.m. is the next offering, and then at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And then next week, the 22nd at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, is the next meeting. Once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting. November 21st at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time is that offering. And then once a month, we have an intensive support group, December 12th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Contact support groups at evoketherapy.com for more information or to register. If you want to do a family trek, that's a wilderness experience for a family or for a couple, you can do that in the middle of your child's program. At the end, you can do that even if your child hasn't been to wilderness. You can do that before your child comes home. Anywhere that you think an experiential outdoor program might benefit, our family trek offering is that offering. Contact admissions at evoketherapy.com to learn more, to sign up. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes a virtual therapist or coach is the best way to get the support. Ours can be found by emailing coaching@evoketherapy.com. We have coaches that will help with parenting, coupleship, families, or individuals, any issue you might be struggling with. We ask all current families to try and experiment with at least 6 of the following 12-step support groups. Any combination of alanon.org, coda.org, familiesanonymous.org, adultchildren.org, or refugerecovery.org. Also, NAMI.org has free classes and information in your local communities that's free. All these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just search Finding You an Evoke Therapy Podcast. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer and find us there. You can also go to YouTube's Evoke's YouTube channel, and you can watch the rebroadcast video versions of these broadcasts. You can find Evoke Therapy Programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter, X, Threads, and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy and at Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. And you can find Evoke Therapy Intensives on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And then, of course, our blog has wonderful content each week. If you want to give back before the end of the year, your tax-deductible donation for people that can't afford treatment, the 3 partners that we collaborate with are ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, or EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. with all of these 501c3s. Your donation is tax deductible, and you can earmark your donation for a specific program or a specific issue or population if it's near and dear to your heart, if that's what you want to do. My next broadcast will be next week, November 21st at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. I'll be talking about communication and differentiation. I love this topic. I can't wait to talk about differentiation and individuation, how communication relates to it. So hope to hear you or see you then and talk to you then. All right, folks. Thanks for joining me. I hope this is a helpful point of contact for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you. Thank you for showing up to this and working on yourself. It makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.